Tears of the Moon, Flames of the Night. Prologue, a room full of tears. The moonlight slipped quietly through the curtains, painting the room in pale silver. A little girl sat curled on the floor, her knees tucked to her chest, her small hands clutching the corner of a blanket as though it could shield her from the weight of the world. Her name was Lyra Solace. She was 7 years old, and tonight, she learned that the world could be cruel. That it could take everything you loved and leave you with nothing but silence. Through the thin walls of her room, she could still hear the muted voices of adults outside, low and serious, talking about arrangements and accidents and so tragic. Every word sounded like it was wrapped in glass, sharp and cold. Her parents were gone. Her father's laugh, the one that filled the house on weekends. Her mother's hands, always smelling of lavender as they brushed Lyra's hair. Gone. She pressed her face into the blanket to muffle her sobs, but it didn't stop the sound from breaking out, raw and small and heartbreaking. She hated this room already. It wasn't her room. It wasn't her house. It wasn't her family. The neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Barron, had brought her here after the accident. They'd been her parents' close friends for years, but to Lyra they felt like strangers. Kind strangers, yes, but strangers nonetheless. A soft knock sounded at the door. She froze, quickly swiping her wet cheeks and whispering to herself, "Don't cry. Don't cry now." The door opened anyway, and someone stepped in, not Mrs. Barron, but him. The boy she'd seen at school before. The boy whose name she already knew but never dared to say aloud. Cale Barron. He was tall, even for 12, and carried himself with a kind of quiet confidence that made everyone notice him. His dark hair fell messily into his eyes, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up carelessly. He didn't smile at her. He didn't kneel or offer her a hand like grown-ups did. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. "You're loud," he said simply. Lyra stiffened. She lowered her gaze, ashamed, and mumbled, "Sorry." He stared at her for a moment longer, then stepped into the room. His footsteps were soft but sure. He crouched in front of her and looked at her directly for the first time. Her breath hitched. She had never been this close to him before, never close enough to see that his eyes were the color of storm clouds, dark and cold, yet somehow, full of something she couldn't name. "You're crying," he observed, though it was obvious. She nodded without looking up. He studied her a bit longer, then sighed. "Stop crying. Crying won't change anything." It was the kind of thing that should have hurt, but his tone wasn't cruel. It was flat. Blunt. Like someone who didn't know how to say the right things but thought he should say something anyway. From that day on, Jason found excuses to sit next to her in lectures, share his notes, walk her home. He teased her about always wearing hoodies, called her mystery girl, and coaxed quiet laughter out of her with ridiculous jokes. It felt nice. It felt like what she'd been looking for all along, a connection that had nothing to do with being a Whitmore. By the end of the semester, they were officially dating. And for the first time in years, Olivia let herself believe that someone could love her for her. What she didn't know, however, was that behind Jason's easy smile lurked something she wouldn't discover until it was far too late. That night, lying in her tiny bed with the rain tapping against her window, Olivia allowed herself a small, hopeful thought. Maybe she didn't need to be the Whitmore heiress anymore. Maybe here, hidden, plain, unremarkable, she could finally be free. Sparkles. End of Chapter 1. Sparkles. Chapter 1, The Banquet of Shattered Dreams. The Barron estate glowed like a jewel under the night sky, every window lit with warm golden light, every corner buzzing with laughter and music. Cars lined the grand driveway, valets in crisp uniforms bowing as guests stepped out, dressed in shimmering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roses and expensive wine. Tonight was no ordinary night. It was the 50th wedding anniversary of Harold and Marianne Varen, a celebration that had attracted the most elite families in the city, business tycoons, politicians, and celebrities alike. But amidst all the glamour and glimmer, Lyra Sala stood quietly at the edge of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, feeling entirely out of place. She hadn't been here in years. The chandeliers above her sparkled, but she felt none of their warmth. Her gown, a floor-length white satin dress that clung gracefully to her figure, drew several appreciative glances from passing men. Yet her thoughts were elsewhere. Her heart was hammering in her chest because of him. Cale Varen. Her brother. Her heartbreak. She hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since the night she boarded a plane and left everything behind. For 3 years she'd buried herself in work, earning a name that echoed across continents. Medical goddess, they called her now. Some even claimed her hands could cure the incurable. But none of that brilliance, none of that praise, could prepare her for seeing him again tonight. The moment came suddenly, a ripple went through the crowd as the doors at the far end opened, and a hush fell over the room. He walked in like a storm wrapped in silk. Cale Varen. His tall frame carried itself with effortless command, his midnight suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders, his dark hair slightly tousled in that way he'd always worn it. But it wasn't just his looks. It was his presence, the way conversations faltered when he passed, the way eyes followed him. And he wasn't alone. On his arm was a woman. She was beautiful, in the way fine art is beautiful, polished, expensive, deliberate. Her gown shimmered like starlight, her hair pinned in a perfect chignon. Cale's fiancé. Lyra felt her breath catch in her throat. She couldn't move. Couldn't look away. She watched as he guided the woman through the crowd, stopping to greet his parents at the center of the room. He didn't notice her, not yet, and for a moment, she was grateful for the anonymity. But then Harold Varen raised his glass and announced to the guests, "Everyone, please raise your glasses to celebrate not just our golden anniversary, but also the engagement of our son, Cale, and his lovely bride-to-be, Celine." A chorus of applause filled the room. Lyra stood frozen as Cale wrapped an arm around Celine's waist, pulling her closer as the cameras flashed. Celine's head rested on his shoulder, and she smiled sweetly, but her eyes slid toward Lyra, sharp and knowing. Later that night, Lyra slipped onto the balcony, needing air. She gripped the railing, forcing herself to breathe, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Why had she even come? Why put herself through this? She'd thought she was stronger now. The sound of soft footsteps behind her broke her thoughts. She turned, expecting maybe one of the guests, but instead, it was Celine. "Oh," Lyra murmured stiffly. "I didn't hear you." Celine smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're Lyra, right?" "The adopted sister," she said, her voice laced with faint disdain. Lyra straightened, her eyes narrowing. "That's right." Celine tilted her head, studying her as though inspecting a rival. "You're quite beautiful," she said finally, though the words sounded more like an accusation than a compliment. Lyra didn't reply. Celine's smile widened just slightly. "I noticed the way you looked at him tonight," she said softly. Lyra froze. Celine leaned closer, her perfume cloying. "Let me make this clear," she whispered. "He's mine now. Whatever silly little crush you've been carrying all these years? Get over it. You're just his sister. Nothing more." With that, she turned and walked back inside, her heels clicking against the marble. Lyra stood there for a long time, the chill of the night sinking deep into her bones. Over the next few weeks, the whispers began. At first, small, glances in the hospital, murmurs in hallways. Then louder. Accusations that she was trying to sabotage Celine and Cale's relationship. Rumors that she was using her position at the hospital to humiliate Celine. Anonymous letters sent to her superiors, claiming she'd endangered patients. Lyra knew exactly who was behind it. But when she tried to explain to Cale, when she finally stood in front of him, heart pounding, voice breaking, He just looked at her with cool indifference. "Stop," he'd said flatly. "You're better than this, Lyra. Let it go." Her hands had curled into fists at her sides. "You think I'm lying?" she whispered. Cale's eyes hardened. "I think you're acting like a jealous child." The words cut deeper than she expected. That night, Lyra stood at the airport terminal, ticket in hand. She didn't look back as she boarded the plane. Not at the city skyline glowing behind her. Not at the memories she was leaving behind. Not even at the boy she had once promised herself she'd make notice her. The boy who couldn't, or wouldn't, see her. 3 years later, when she returned, she was no longer just a girl with a broken heart. She was the medical goddess. But the man waiting for her now wasn't Cale. It was someone far more dangerous. Far more relentless. And he would tear the world apart just to make her his. New Moon. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2, The First Thorn. The city had not changed. Its skyline still cut through the clouds like knives of glass and steel, and the streets still pulsed with the restless rhythm of ambition. But Lyra was no longer the same girl who had left. When she stepped out of the car in front of St. Raphael's Hospital, every head turned. Not just because of her beauty, though she was breathtaking in her fitted ivory coat and heels, her hair glinting like spun moonlight, but because of the aura she carried now. Confidence. Distance. Power. She walked through the revolving doors with the quiet composure of someone who belonged, and knew it. She had been gone 3 years, but the whispers had followed her here even before she arrived. "The medical goddess is back," someone murmured. "I heard she operated on a Saudi prince last month. They say she saved the Queen of Ardia when no one else could." Lyra ignored the chatter and made her way to her office, where flowers already sat waiting, orchids, lilies, even roses, all from grateful patients and admirers. She didn't stop to admire them. She simply set her bag down and began reviewing her schedule. And yet, beneath the cool mask she wore, her stomach still quailed with unease. Because she knew it was only a matter of time before they found her. Cale. Anne. Celine. She didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, as she was finishing a consult, her assistant poked her head in, looking flustered. "Dr. Salas, there's someone here to see you." Lyra looked up, arching a brow. "A patient?" Her assistant hesitated. "No. It's her." Lyra's chest tightened, but she kept her voice even. "Send her in." The door swung open, and Celine entered like she owned the place. Still impeccably dressed, a tailored dress in blood-red silk, diamonds glittering at her throat. But her beauty now seemed harder, sharper, like glass edges hidden in velvet. "Well," Celine purred, closing the door behind her. "If it isn't our little prodigy come home." Lyra rose to her full height, her expression calm. "Celine. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Celine walked slowly around the room, running her fingers lightly over the books and certificates that lined the shelves. "You've done well for yourself," she said finally, though her tone dripped with disdain. Lyra didn't flinch. "Thank you." Celine turned then, her eyes glinting. "But don't think for a second that your little sabbatical excuses what you did before you left. You humiliated me. You tried to ruin my engagement. You embarrassed Cale." Lyra's jaw tightened. "I didn't." But Celine cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Oh, please. Don't bother denying it. Everyone knows what you were after. Poor little adopted sister, clinging to her brother like some pitiful puppy." The words struck harder than Lyra expected, but she refused to let Celine see. "Is that all?" she asked coolly. Celine took a step closer, her smile widening. "No," she said softly. "You see. Cale is mine. He always has been. Whatever childish fantasy you had in that pretty little head of yours, it ends here. You don't belong in his world, Lyra. You never did." For a moment, the room was silent, heavy with the weight of unsaid things. Then Lyra straightened, her gaze steady. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't belong in your world. But don't mistake my silence for submission, Celine. I've learned a few things these past 3 years. And one of them is how to recognize a snake." Celine's eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, Lyra moved to the door and opened it. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. Please see yourself out." Celine glared at her for a long beat before finally sweeping past her and out of the office, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. But that was only the beginning. It started small, papers disappearing from her desk, critical reports misplaced. Then larger. Appointments mysteriously cancelled, patients rescheduled without her knowledge, colleagues suddenly distant. And then came the whispers again. "She's reckless, she endangered that child last week. I heard she left the conference early because she botched a surgery. She's not as brilliant as they say, you know." Lyra tried to ignore it, to focus on her work, but every day the shadows grew longer. She knew Celine was behind it. She just couldn't prove it, yet. The final blow came at a charity gala 2 weeks later. Lyra had been invited as the guest of honor, a recognition of her contributions to the hospital's children's wing. She'd chosen a simple black gown, elegant but understated, and arrived with her head held high despite the daggers she felt in the air. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Guests congratulated her, thanked her for her work, marveled at her accomplishments. But then a familiar voice rose above the crowd, and the room fell silent. "Well, well. Look who decided to show up." Lyra turned, her breath catching. Cale. Standing near the entrance, looking impossibly handsome in a dark 3-piece suit, his presence still as magnetic and infuriating as ever. On his arm, of course, was Celine. His eyes found hers across the room, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw something in them. Something she couldn't name. But then he looked away. Celine leaned in and whispered something in his ear, and he nodded faintly before letting her go. She walked toward Lyra, her smile like a blade. "Oh, darling," Celine said sweetly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I just wanted to say, it's so brave of you to keep showing up like this after everything." Lyra stared at her coolly. "After what, exactly?" Celine feigned surprise. "Oh, you don't know? That poor boy from pediatrics? The one whose mother said you nearly killed him with your negligence?" Gasps and murmurs rose from the crowd around them. Lyra froze. "That's a lie," she said quietly, but her voice carried. Celine's smile widened. "Oh, sweetheart. Everyone here knows it's true. Cale himself had to step in and apologize on your behalf." Lyra glanced at Cale, and to her horror, he didn't deny it. Instead, he simply looked at her with that same flat, unreadable expression he'd worn 3 years ago. And in that moment, something inside her broke. When the gala ended, she slipped out without saying a word. Her phone rang later, Cale. But she let it go to voicemail. Instead, she packed her bags. Again. Because she refused to stay where she wasn't wanted. Where she wasn't believed. It wasn't until she was on the plane again, staring out at the endless night sky, that she whispered to herself. "This time, I'm not coming back for anyone but me." But fate, she would soon learn, had other plans. Because in the shadows of that city, another man was already searching for her. Not to break her. Not to belittle her. But to claim her. Completely, fiercely, and without apology. And he would not stop until she was his. New Moon. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3, The Medical Goddess. The hospital in Geneva overlooked the lake, its glass facade catching the morning sun. Inside, the corridors were bright, spotless, and quiet, a temple of healing that smelled faintly of antiseptic and roses. In the center of it all stood Lyra Solace, calm as moonlight and sharp as a blade. "Scalpel," she murmured. The nurse handed it to her instantly, their hands steady even as everyone else in the operating theater held their breath. Lyra moved with a grace that mesmerized, her fingers precise, her voice low but commanding. This was the third emergency surgery of the morning, and she hadn't faltered once. It was said in hushed tones throughout Europe's medical circles, if you were dying, if all hope was lost, pray she took your case. Because if she did, you'd live. They called her the medical goddess now. It had been 2.5 years since she left the city she once called home. 2.5 years since Cale's cold eyes had turned her away. 2.5 years since she'd walked out of the gala and into the storm. And in that time, she'd built herself into something no one could ignore anymore. After the surgery, she stripped off her gloves and gown, washing her hands meticulously before stepping out of the OR. The hospital director, a stout, balding man with eyes full of respect, was waiting for her. Dr. Salas, he greeted with a small bow. Your patient is stable. Once again, you've done what no one else could. Lyra offered a faint smile. Thank you. You have another invitation, he added, holding out a cream-colored envelope. She sighed inwardly but accepted it. Her life was a blur of surgeries, galas, lectures, awards. But the glitz never touched her heart. Not really. Every morning, she woke up thinking only of her patients. Every night, she went to bed alone, no one to notice how tired she really was. But that was fine. Better than letting anyone close enough to hurt her again. It wasn't until later that evening, in her quiet apartment overlooking the lake, that she opened the envelope. It was a formal invitation to a medical conference in Florence, one of the most prestigious in the world. Nothing unusual. Except, at the bottom of the page, scribbled in black ink was a single line. Your attendance is not optional. We'll meet there. Ian. Lyra blinked at the note, her brows drawing together. She didn't know anyone with those initials. But something about the handwriting, bold, slanted, confident, sent a strange chill down her spine. She set the invitation aside, dismissing it as some overeager colleague's idea of humor. But she couldn't quite shake the feeling that someone was watching.